DC-Series towers ship completely assembled from the factory, with steel frame weld-coated and powder-coated, and with the power system, wiring, and plumbing already installed and pre-tested. For elevating towers, this includes self-contained tower hydraulics that utilize a pre-installed electric over hydraulic pump. Altogether, this makes installation of the tower very time efficient. Watch how the whole system installs in less than half the time, on average, of a hydraulic system, saving hundreds of dollars in labor installation costs. Each installation is a little different, customized to the particular truck or body. This video is intended to give you a general overview. You will need at least 12 inches of clearance between the back of the cab and the body. In the case of some luggers, you must have 12 inches distance between the back of the cab and the closest point any container will come to the cab. Hoist the pre-assembled tower structure onto the frame behind the cab, positioning it as close to the cab as possible, with at least 2 inches clearance. Make sure the tower is square to the cab and body, and bolt it to the frame using one of the 2 available bracket variations, which are sold separately. The fastest method is the U-bolt system shown here. Tighten the first nut securely and then add a second or jam nut. Repeat for all 4 U-bolts. Next, install the circuit breaker, preferably in a place where it is easily accessible and not in the way. We placed it here because it is protected, and the step cover won't need to be removed in order to access the reset button. Reset the circuit breaker by pushing the button on top and then moving the flipper mechanism toward the button. Next, attach the battery wire. Be sure to keep the battery wire away from the drivetrain and the PTO. Don't wrap the wire around anything. It's always best to run both the positive and negative all the way to the power supply, as this ensures a proper ground. Get a good crimp when installing the terminals. Pivot installation is easy too. With the tower down, first run a tape measure from the top of the tower assembly down to the side of the body, level with the height at which you want to mount the pivot. Use an even feet measurement and make a mark on the body. Use the same even foot measurement and run the tape from the corner of the longest container you will be tarping to the side of the body and make another mark. Then make a new mark at the halfway point between your first 2 marks. This is where the pivot should be located. The pivot assemblies come from the factory fully assembled with the springs. We have removed them for illustrative purposes to show how the pivot pin should be placed on the center mark and the drill holes marked. Drill 2 half-inch holes to mount the tarp pivot. Then attach the pivot with 2 grade 5 bolts and nuts included in the DC series kit. Repeat this to attach the pivot assembly to the other side of the vehicle. Installing the tarp is easy and fast. You can install the tarp after the tower has been installed, or if you have a power source, you can install the tarp while the tower is still bolted to the skid. The Roll-Rite aluminum tarp axle has pre-threaded grooves along its entire length. Center the tarp on the tarp axle and fasten it down with the button head screws provided through each tarp eyelet. Roll up the tarp so that it rotates over, not under, the axle or spool of the integrated tarp housing on the tower. Attaching the upper arms is easy and fast too. You can do this before or after you install the lower pivot arm. Start with the tower in the park position or lowest stowed position. Note this will vary based on the truck and containers being hauled, but it is typically all the way down. Measure the distance from the top of the tower to the pivot. Let the tarp out to the end of the vehicle. Slide the top arm into the bottom arm, using the measurement to determine how far in to slide the top arm. Fasten the top arm to the bottom arm with the 2 set screws provided. Next, thread the tarp bow through the tarp pocket. Put on the 2 sets of tarp centering flanges. Fasten the tarp bow to the 90-degree angles by tightening the bolts. Then fasten the 90-degree angles to the top arms by tightening the bolts. Center the tarp on the tarp bow and position the inside tarping center flanges against the tarp, then tighten the screws on the bearings. Position the outside tarp flanges so that they line up with the edges of the container or the tarp spool end caps, and tighten the screws. Using the remote or the black box, raise the tower to the highest position and roll up the tarp into the tarp housing. As the tarp gets close to the housing, you will have to adjust the tower to its standard travel or park position in order to fully wind the tarp in. The installation is now complete.